and welcome to episode 1 of Career Podcasts with Mentorsphere. I'm Medha, your host of this podcast, and together we're going to explore the career challenges, milestones, and inspiring stories of industry mentors from across fields. On this episode, we'll be chatting with the founder of a startup that is breaking barriers in the battle towards gender equality by financially educating women across this country. Neha Singh started Womanista from a place of love for finance, but today she's educating over 10,000 women. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode, Neha.
Thank you so much for having me here, and I hope I can add value to everybody who's listening.
Neha, Womanista brings together two spaces that have historically and stereotypically been male dominated: financial services and, entrepreneurship in general. But before we dive deeper into either, can I take you back a few years to when you had to make a career decision, right? From subject selection to choosing a college to deciding to do an MBA. Do you remember what Neha back then was thinking? How do you think she approached her career decision?
I had been a topper of my school for class 10th, so there was this very natural assumption that I will be taking science. That was, I think, the first conscious decision I took. And I took up commerce because I come from a business family and I always had this desire to do something which would be of my own. And then from there, it just kept building. I got into a Bachelor's of Commerce degree in one of the best colleges in India. And I said, okay, maybe I will try doing an MBA. Finance kind of, meets the overall expectation. And then I'll figure it'll buy me a little more time. But while I was in my final year, I came across this wonderful book called Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and it changed. It actually, I think it woke me up to the fact that money and personal finance can actually create new lives and create freedom for you to do whatever you want in your life. And that was the change of my journey. I started really reading about personal finance, wealth management, what are the areas in financial services which I could explore. And before I did my MBA, actually, I went and I got myself an internship in Kotak Wealth Management. And I was so clear that I wanted to be in this space by then. So it's been a journey. I think it just takes you a lot of saying no. I think it's a process of elimination before you really choose. But it's important to eliminate. Otherwise, you're like stuck in a loop.
Would you say that reading Rich Dad Poor Dad was your movie style breakthrough moment?
Absolutely. It was my breakthrough moment of, hey, why is nobody talking about this? Why did I not learn this? I am a commerce student and I am from a background in this space, and I was not taught about this in this manner. It automatically in my mind connected with another passion of mine, which was women empowerment and independence of women. And I felt like, hey, I cracked it. This is what I would have loved to do back then as well. So it's just taken me around 15 years of my life to figure out how I can do what I really wanted to do.
But you correctly pointed out, right? Financial literacy hasn't been taught to us and is still not taught to us as an essential life skill, which actually is interesting because like most things in patriarchal society, since you touched upon the gender aspect, money too is gendered. Access to money, hence access to resources, independence of choice, autonomy in decision making are all different for men and women. Which actually brings me to what your leading vision for Womanista has been and how do you aim to achieve it?
At the end of the day, the important thing for me is that no woman should have money as the reason that she cannot make a decision for her life. That could be a personal decision, a professional decision, a decision to break out of abusive relationships. Money should not be that inhibition or that limitation that you have brought into your life because of which you can't take those decisions. So if you ask me, that is at the heart of what I consider as empowerment, because if you're economically sound, then you can figure out a lot of other things. True. With this knowledge and with these tools, it brings back control to a lot of women. And then they can make choices, right? You can choose to do whatever you want to do without being questioned or without being dependent on anyone.
We call it a luxury of choice. I don't think it is a luxury of choice. If you are financially independent, choice is something that's a natural consequence of that financial independence.
Absolutely. I feel like, women and very smart, educated women from good colleges put this barrier on themselves that, hey, listen, if it's about buying the house or taking decisions for our children's education, the man is going to manage it.
Right.
But I don't understand that. Why? If he's bringing in the money, then why can't you learn how to manage that money and make sure that the family goals are met? it's just a barrier. I think it's a patriarchal barrier that we're all living with, which it's actually just a skill.
Neha, I'd love to understand what is the typical target audience that you've seen in terms of learners on your platform. This is in terms of demographics, in terms of the economic strata that they come from. And if I may ask, are a lot of them otherwise financially independent, or are they dependent on their families?
That's a good question. So, when I started Womanista, there was just one demographic which was clear in my mind, and it was somebody who would be from tier 1, tier 2, middle class woman, educated in English, because we deliver all our courses in English.
Right.
And at that point, I was unsure whether we're going after the working woman or we're going after the homemaker. So, but it's been a year and a half, and few things which have come out. First, initially, when we started, our demographic was somewhere around 29 to 32-year-old woman who is pretty much educated, conversant, has worked somewhere, today had to take a break due to some reasons, personal reasons, but has an aspiration to earn her own living. That was generally the demographic we started with. Over the last year, what I've been observing is that the age which is coming to us is younger and younger. So now my average age in a class would be somewhere around 24 or 25. There are girls who are learning about money even before they earn their first salary, because they're like, I remember this girl who said, I'm coming for a tax class. I will be joining my job next month, and from the first salary, I need to know how I can plan my taxes. I don't want to sound stupid in front of the HR. It was a wow moment for me. So demographic has been shifting, but to be honest, working or non-working, I find a lot of freelancers, small business owners, self-employed professionals, a lot of them, or even like dentists, doctors, teachers coming in. So it's fairly varied. We have a lot of housewives also who come to us. And generally, these are mothers. So these are women who have somebody who's dependent on them and they want to now feel. So few things. One is, of course, they want to make sure that kids' goals are met. And maybe they're not so clear about, what other families' finances, and they feel like they need to get in control. And the other one is who's probably been a little shaken up because of what they've seen around during COVID.
Right. So Neha, tell me, typically what is the level of knowledge learners that come to your platform come with? Do they have base level learning and are looking to build on that, or are they absolutely financially clueless?
Okay, so one of the most common statements I hear in my free webinars, or if I'm speaking to someone also and I tell them that I do this work for women, is this is the standard line. Okay, I am financially so poor. I'm like financially so stupid. I think I ask you the stupidest questions. So do you think I can walk into your class? And I say this to them, that if you were somebody who's really unfit and you walked into a gym, do you think that gym would be of benefit to you? Or if you were somebody super fit and you walked into the gym, who do you think can derive more benefit from going to a gym? It's always an unfit person who needs to walk into the gym, because a fit person has already got the right tools and the right lifestyle. Right. So change needs to happen with somebody who's at financially level 0. Most of the women, even if they are financially quite smart, actually, they believe that they are financially quite stupid. A lot of them come telling me this, that it's a stupid question, sorry. So I would say the statistics tell you that in India, 8 out of 10 people are financially illiterate, men or women.
Men and women included,
right.
Yeah.
So with that, everybody who's coming in is a beginner.
Yeah.
But the interesting part is that women are very, very aware that they are very bad at this. So we need to keep breaking that barrier with them, that it's don't start the question by saying, I know it's a stupid question, but. So that's something which we consciously tell them to stop saying. And we actually did this recently with a group of our stock investor women. We just did a reflection meet, and we asked them, when you hear Womanista, what comes to you? What's the first thing that you think of? I think 80% of them said empowerment. So they feel they say this, that we feel in control, we feel empowered. And now my husband gives me the money, hey, you manage it because you've done all these classes and you're doing such a great job of it.
But that's the behavioral change that you're trying to bring about, right?
Yes.
So it seems like it was always on the surface, but platforms like yours are actually bringing out latent feelings that women have typically harbored but didn't have an outlet to explore. Neha, what are the star performing courses of the last one odd year?
Stock investing was something which last year was really, really big, right? That's something which would lead in a lot of women to come in, because there is this major FOMO of I'm missing out, my neighbor's making money and everybody's making money. And of course, there's this message that they get that this is something they can do sitting
At home.
from home,
Yeah.
and it's just with their mobile phones, etc. So a lot of them come in intrigued by stocks, but we have a system where we do multiple, we connect with them one-on-one, and many times we try to go back and see where are they when it comes to their skill set, right? So
Right.
then we'll go back and suggest something which is our Master Your Money class, which is a very basic
Okay.
class,
Okay.
which covers concepts around budgeting, insurance, investment products, how do you do goal-based financial planning.
Okay.
So we make sure that we start them from there rather than directly make them jump into a very aggressive product like stocks.
So, Neha, we constitute 48.5% of the population, but the percentage of women owning bank accounts has reached only 80% as recent as 2019. And while that number might have a lot of us feeling proud, unfortunately, more than half of those accounts are actually lying dormant, right? What do you see as typical barriers to financially including women in India?
I think I would largely summarize it as two big reasons. One is the lack of their own inclusion in the workforce, which means that a lot of women are not earning their own income, which automatically disengages them with the money conversation. And the second part of this is definitely patriarchal norms, which have been passed on as legacies. So if you just reflect back as young children, boys and girls, when they are spoken to about financial matters, at least, that's what used to happen, and there's change, but is that a boy would be speaking more to his father around,
Right.
He has to take charge, he has to be taking the difficult decisions for the family, he has to take the responsibility of his future family, etc. That's the messaging generally as young boys or growing up men.
Right.
But to girls, it's always around making sure that they have a secure life partner, somebody who will take care of her, protect her, take care of her needs. So the messaging right from there is always that I need to be protected and the man has to protect me. Right. And from there, everything starts with the economic decisions to protect me financially,
Right.
provide me with a home, make sure I have a good lifestyle. It's the guy.
Right.
So you automatically yourself, you have granted that
Liberty
job
to
or
the
that
other.
responsibility.
Yeah.
Now, when you've given that responsibility, automatically you've also taken away that freedom of choice from yourself. So I think a lot of this has been going on without us realizing. It's just that now with more conversation around it, more exposure, and also a lot more women going back to work, trying to build their own sources of income, is when they are trying to break free from this patriarchy.
The stereotypical belief, like you mentioned, is that women can't handle business and finances. And since the societal norm has been prevalent since immemorial, women tend to believe that themselves, hence furthering that stereotypical notion, right? Like, or typically you won't have a woman going to an ATM or a bank on her own, or if she's earning something, she would hand it to her husband or brother or father.
Even if they don't want to, many
Right.
times they do that, or they
Correct.
are asked to do
Correct.
that.
Neha, speaking of the narrative and the social norm, how do you see that changing now, especially with platforms like yours that are helping build that behavioral change?
Few major changes which are happening in society, I think, in the way we are thinking about ourselves in relationships. I think that's one of the primary drivers for women because, like I said, there's a protector-protectee relationship, which is now, it's changing. Now the narrative is I can take care of myself, right? Young people are thinking harder before getting committed in relationships. And even when they are, they want to be on a financially independent footing. So that's the kind of conversation they're having that, we would like to continue working. What are your views around those things? Also, the woman saying that, listen, I would like to choose to work. We might have kids, but I would still want to go back to work. How are we going to figure that out? The other narrative which is changing is with the older generation, which is already in these kind of commitments. And like I said, who feels fairly trapped and concerned about how they will be managing their lives and their children's lives if something were to happen to the so-called protector.
Right.
So the narrative there is saying, hey, listen, I need to at least wake up and figure things out. The second narrative there is that a lot of them have started seeing themselves as role model parents now, and they're aware of the fact that what they do impacts the way their children will have a future. Like the way they behave is how their kids are going to behave. So a lot of mothers who come in, they say that I would love for my kid to think of me as a financially smart woman. Like I know children think that my mommy can cook well and my mommy can take care of everything else in the house. But when it comes to money, then they say, oh, it's Papa. So a lot of them want to change that as well.
Neha, financial literacy, which is the focus of Womanista, is of course a huge step towards financial inclusion of women. However, the fact that financial literacy isn't even taught to us as an essential life skill from early on in life ends up creating a vast pool of women who are already financially clueless, which is of course a huge chunk of the target audience in terms of learners on your platform, and you're tirelessly working to bridge that gap. But of course, the fight to financial literacy for all is a long and hard one, right? What collective initiatives do you see in terms of policy endeavors by governments or creative solutions by the private sector, by startups like yours, that can actually bridge this gap of women that have already been excluded from the financial dialogue?
I think a lot of work has already started happening from a space of, let's say, the new age startups in the fintech space, which do a fairly good amount of outreach when it comes to financial literacy. They're trying to bridge the gap of bringing experts and engaging with young people, or just using platforms like YouTube and so on to bring out the right information. I also see a lot of initiatives in terms of financial awareness, which are done by platforms like NISM and NSE, BSE, etc. In my opinion, the challenge is not that there is not enough talk about it or there's not work around providing these kind of awareness camps or services. I think the challenge more is that money itself is a conversation which is so taboo in our society that not too many people want to walk into these seminars. It's really difficult to get an audience who would want to learn about money matters. So the real question is, how are you breaking this mindset? So honestly, with men, you'll find a larger audience. Why? Because, like I said, a lot of them have to take financial decisions. They're pushed to a corner where they need to know about these.
True.
Otherwise, they don't know how they're going to help the family.
True.
Now, when it comes to women, till the time you're not giving them an incentive, a motivation, an end objective for themselves, what inclination do they have to walk into any of these platforms? And also, honestly, two more challenges which come with women. One is mobility and the other one is access to technology, right? So a lot of this is happening on social media, and a lot of women don't even own devices of their own. So they're literally on borrowed devices. So that's another huge challenge. So
absolutely,
if you're doing with women, it's got to be more around how do I take charge of my life? And this is one amongst many skills that she should be taught. And also be provided with platforms where it's easy for her to access this on her own. But I think the first gap is to bring the woman into the conversation.
Now, you're a woman entrepreneur standing tall in a space that has continued to be a largely male-dominated field. Strong reiteration of a strange patriarchal stereotype that only men can take charge of business and finances. Now, have there been challenges that you think are specific to a woman founder in financial services or the entrepreneurial space in general? And how have you typically approached them?
Let's talk about women in financial services. I think there are far more women in financial services than many other industries, I would say. So I don't think we have not seen sound financial role models in this industry. I wouldn't say that. In fact, there was a point when all the banks, the top banks of India, were headed by women, right? Yes. When it comes to being a woman in a startup in financial services, the interesting part is that two things. One is that the area that I've picked, which is financial literacy, I think in itself, it's a very underrated kind of area. I don't think even financial services providers see the value in this. This is not going to give you results. It's not going to generate revenue for you tomorrow. Right? But selling a mutual fund will. So it's a very tangible thing, and it can happen tomorrow. Now, learning takes time. It takes effort. It's about breaking barriers and then learning about money and women. I mean, this is like a combination which I was told was like
lethal.
Yeah, I mean, it was like, is this something you do full time? I've been told stuff like that. It's like, is this just, a side thing that you're doing with your main job? Because is that enough work that you have? Like, are there enough women who even come to your class? I have even been told this multiple times by many, many people from financial services, senior people from the industry. There are not enough women. You're not going to ever be commercially a viable business. There is no real product. There is no real audience. You need to open this to both men and women. Money is gender neutral. How does it matter?
Just to put a few things in perspective, as per the sixth economic census, women entrepreneurs collectively contribute to a little over 3% of the industrial output. And yet, when it comes to startup funding, our numbers are pitiably low, right? Just the third quarter of 2021 has seen startup investments to the tune of roughly $13 billion, but women led startups account for less than 2% of that investment. As a business that has an all-woman founding team, has getting funding been a challenge for you? Is that something that you're looking to do?
Honestly, we've been bootstrapping since the beginning because of one of the big reasons for that is also because I'm in no rush to get funded and be kind of taken away from the core goal of the platform. I have spoken to a few people who are from this space and discussed the idea and the product with them. And one of the things that I notice is that while there is a lot of appreciation for the inspiration behind what we're doing, when it comes to really putting down the money, a few things which somehow tend to work better is if it is, a very scalable model.
Right.
And if being a single founder is also something which is not exactly ideal, there needs to be someone with me from kind of a complementary background. The second challenge which I do see or which I do hear is that how you're going to make sure that, you have enough audience or you make sure, get in the other gender as well into the conversation.
What would you say are your top highlights and learnings from your career till date that have shaped the startup founder that you are today?
For many, many years as a young person who was doing very well academically and who was fairly ambitious, I used to be very, very concerned about what would my career look like? What would my life look like when I am 40? I would read these magazines around, 40 under 40 and 30 under 30. And I would think that that's going to be me someday. But I never was clear which way I'm going to go. So I have had a very beautiful career which started in financial services. I had the courage and the opportunity to move out of financial services where I felt that this is not while personal finance was very special to me, but I realized very early that because financial literacy is so poor, many times we are kind of selling products which are not appropriate products. We are forced to do those kind of things. So I realized that this industry is not where my heart was. And I had the courage as well as the opportunity to switch into another career. So I was in consulting, which opened my world to how businesses function, how different industries function. It nurtured my hunger to know more about the world of business. And finally, I landed up handling business for a travel company for a certain section of their business team. And that gave me the practical experience. So when I look back, I feel like unknowingly, I set myself up to starting from my knowledge of the core subject that I teach, getting exposure to some practical issues there, building up with exposure to multiple businesses, opening my mind to how various industries work. And then finally, my third big switch, which was around a business role in a travel company, helped me execute it. So today I feel like it all kind of worked out well, right? 15 years and now we're ready to put all of those learnings together.
Absolutely.
And create something of our own.
Amen to that. Is there a message you'd like to give to women that are listening to you right now and have a dream to start something of their own someday?
Oh, yes. I would love to say that whatever it is, whatever those fears are or whatever is stopping you right now from starting something of your own, drop it and don't wait to be perfect. Just start, take a baby step and you learn. You learn along the way. I know many times as women, we tend to be perfectionists. We wait for, only when I know everything will I take a decision. But, business or life is about taking risks, honestly. And you don't know how long you're going to be here. So just start and you'll figure it out.
Neha, this session has been a powerhouse of inspiration. And I think on a personal note, being a startup founder myself, I think what I'm taking back from this chat is immense amount of strength, motivation and zeal to sort of go back tomorrow to work, create impactful value and breaking stereotypes across the block, whatever comes in my way. On behalf of our listeners and the entire team of Mentorsphere, we truly thank you for your time.
I loved having this conversation.
Thank you so much, Neha. For the benefit of our listeners, Mentorsphere is a mentorship platform that connects industry mentors like Neha to students and working professionals looking for career guidance. Neha offers mentoring hours on our platform, so if you're looking to know how to start up or how to get into financial services as a career, book your time with her today. Thank you for tuning in. We'll catch you on the next episode of Career Podcasts with Mentorsphere. Challenges, milestones, and inspiring stories of people across professions. As India increasingly becomes one of the most depressed nations in the world, the role of mental health professionals like the guest on our show today becomes increasingly important. A psychologist and researcher, Shivangi Khattar did her BA in behavioral sciences before going on to doing a master's in clinical psychology. She has a body of work across mental health awareness building and destigmatization, career guidance support, and a lot of research spanning diverse aspects of behavioral sciences. Shivangi has taken her research to the next level by authoring various papers in her field and is currently pursuing her PhD in psychology from Ashoka University. Shivangi is an absolute treat to chat with. Thank you so much, Shivangi, for joining us on this episode.
Thank you, Medha, and I'm really excited as well to be a part of the Mentorsphere family.
I'm so glad, Shivangi. In fact, launching straight in, I'm very curious to know what spurred an interest, in this space because this is a lesser traversed sector.
So I think for me personally, it was my mom who actually saw it in me. Growing up, of course, we all come from different kinds of family environments and in some cases dysfunctional, in some cases more functional. I always had a knack of understanding and listening and hearing what was happening in my family. Seeing that, my mother really encouraged me to think about psychology. So I started looking more into psychology and reading about it. And I realized that not a lot of schools offer psychology in the humanities stream. And at that point, it was actually great for me because DPS was offering psychology and physics, one of the main subjects in the stream. It was like a natural fitting. I loved psychology. I fell in love with psychology. And I realized that this is what I was meant to do.
It's a 1 in a million case where someone finds a career fit at a subject selection stage. So,
yes.
Back in the day, yes, you're right. DPS RK Puram was probably an aberration, and very few schools did offer that as a part of the subject stream. Today, of course, that's changing. One can obviously do it as a part of humanities. You could also do it as a fifth subject add-on, with other streams as well, which is interesting.
Right.
What exactly would be that strong subject base at school level that could stand someone in this space in good stead?
What you take during your high school isn't so important because eventually in your undergraduate and graduate degrees, you are given the training for the specific subject. But high school help you understand what working in this area would look like, getting a general feel of it. If psychology interests you, taking psychology is literally all you need to be able to understand what it will look like. But if you're confident about math, if it is a challenge you can take up, which I know is hard because even for me it was, it's just a running joke among my friends. How am I able to implement stats in my life right now?
There's always that one person in every group.
Yes, absolutely. And I was that person.
I figured integration 1 month before the board exam.
I think I had a similar experience. But I remember, I think it's really funny, literally calling on my friends and saying, "Oh, jo fractions hota hai, wo upar wala hota hai, niche wala hota hai."
Wow, that's the point when you know you're doomed.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. But I think I was able to, feel more confident about dealing with numbers. That's how it really helped me. And that's really important in psychology because whether it is going into research or eventually even taking cases where you're going to do assessments, right? Whether it's in the clinical area of work, it's got a lot to do with basic calculation and computation. Sociology is something that can also really help you understand psychology. Interestingly, my first year in college in DU was sociology honors. Yeah, and you know how it's so cutthroat in terms of percentage and grade.
Yeah.
So I missed the psych percentage by a few points, and I just decided to go in with sociology and kind of explore sociology, knowing at the back of my mind that I definitely just wanted to do psychology. You can consider that as a year that I dropped, but honestly, I actually learned a lot. And I was anyway, meanwhile, thinking about applying abroad for psychology. And it kind of worked out because it gave me a year to really focus on my applications and go, apply for liberal art courses and courses like that would allow me to explore behavioral sciences. In fact, now in psychology, it's come up so much that there are so many good universities which are private that you can go to. For instance, Amity, or there is Ambedkar. So a lot of places like this where you get really solid training on like therapeutic work or intervention work, clinical psychology or counseling psychology. You have some great options from Jindal, Ashoka, which, are actually some of the most up and coming colleges now.
Shivangi, for the benefit of our listeners, could you break down what exactly the psych space entails and what its subsets look like?
So generally, the way that psychology is understood is anything that has to do with understanding of the mind and how that might impact behavior. That comes under psychology, right? And now moving forward, there are so many different branches of psychology which further kind of go into specialization. If I had to just give you a very rough gist, I'll cover some of the main ones. When you think about mind and behavior connections, you think about wanting to explore mental health. Right. So starting from mental health, there are two different areas, clinical and counseling psychology. Obviously, if you're a person who is interested in becoming a doctor and then picking up a specialization around mental health issues, pick psychiatry. So that's a completely different route altogether. But if you are interested in working from a less medical perspective and more of like a therapeutic or intervention perspective, you pick either clinical psychology or counseling psychology. So when you look into the difference between the two, essentially the idea is that clinical psychology will integrate the science and the practice and try to understand the disorder or the issue from a problem-focused perspective, meaning that it'll promote aspects like how the person can adjust, how can they have personal development, how can they adapt. If you require a diagnosis, you go to a clinical psychologist because they have the license to give, you an assessment, a formal assessment report and a formal diagnostic report. Now, coming to counseling psychology, it's more like a strength-focused perspective. So a counseling psychologist works in tandem with a clinical psychologist, and a clinical psychologist works in tandem with a psychiatrist. When a clinical psychologist is diagnosing or assessing someone based on a series of tests and assessments, they then can also, in addition to their therapy, reach out to a psychiatrist for medication support. Okay. A counselor, on the other hand, can recommend you to a psychiatrist, but you can't work in support with a psychiatrist because you need a clinician for that. So a counseling psychologist can essentially work with you on specific areas like, let's say, adjustment issues, relationship issues, anxiety, depression as well sometimes. But if the severity increases, counselor usually, and ethically so, likes to allocate the case to a clinical psychologist. If you're facing issues that may be less severe, going to a counselor would be the right choice to make because this is something that is not causing severe dysfunction in your life. At the point you feel, I need to get a diagnosis now. You have attention issues all your life, but now it's really interfering in your work. You personally can also make that distinction.
Right.
So other than mental health, there are also individuals who might be interested in specifically studying children or the way that individuals develop over the years. Then there is cognitive psychology, which focuses specifically again on a lot of research. So more often than not, cognitive psychologists and developmental psychologists end up going into research. Perception, problem solving, communication, language, these kind of things interest you. Like understanding memory, what happened during 9/11 or 26/11, how much people remember, why don't they remember. Those kind of things go into cognitive psychology. If you're interested in, let's say, working with corporates, then organizational psychology will be the route you take because you would be able to work with employees and employers and help them build relationships and understand what motivates them and what works for them. Like when you talk about health also, there are these two areas, forensic psychology and health psychology.
Right.
When you talk about forensic psychology, if you're interested in criminal investigation and the law,
right,
then the field of psychology that works within the criminal justice system and civil courts and, courts in general, that is for forensic psychology.
Understood.
So we have a lot of forensic psychologists who also end up taking cases and working with mental health because they would specifically think about factors that influence behaviors coming from the findings, like from court.
That's so interesting.
They might work with either, let's say, people who've been convicted of crime or done their time in jail or, things like that. So that is that one distinction. And health psychology is like more of a sort of medical psych focused area
Understood.
which comes in if you are interested in focusing on the health status of a person. Of course, other factors like socioeconomic background, education, all these things also they look into. For instance, in hospitals, health psychologists would really look into and research about why a person complies with instructions given by doctors or not. So they work in clinical settings much like clinical psychologists. The difference would be that clinical psychologists would be focusing on diagnosis, therapy, assessment, while health psychologists would be focusing on these aspects.
Right.
So because human behavior is so dynamic and interlinked,
Right.
within psychology, though we have come up with a lot of different areas and branches, you do end up integrating them.
Also, for the benefit of our listeners, Shivangi does offer 1:1 mentorship sessions on our platform. So,
Yes.
if you are looking to gain career guidance from her and have specific queries linked with the psych space, she's always up for a quick 30-minute chat. So, please do reach out to her on our platform. And after that, not so subtle plug-in.
So there's a general belief, Shivangi, that you don't really earn too much as a psychologist. Can you shed a little light on what a typical career trajectory would look like for a psychologist, given that fact?
One thing that in this field people know is that it's really hard to earn a lot. Talk to any person who's a professional in the field who will be doing 3-4 other things. So either consulting as a counselor or a clinician, a clinical psychologist at different organizations. You're doing your own private practice. You are taking up research positions.
Correct.
Shivangi, could you walk us through your work in the mental health space?
One of the major experiences I think for me that I was really lucky to have was that I found out about a very small but impactful youth initiative called Your Wonderful Project, and they work on mental health awareness and advocacy. I said, I want to join a movement like that, and I went ahead and applied. Ever since then, I was able to take workshops, really transform the way research was being conducted, kind of, start doing research work independently, which is big for a small organization. And, loved their model of providing support, which is like a peer support kind of model. From the ideological perspective, it's very similar to the understanding of the step model. A step model would work very well in a country like India or a low and middle income country because you're using less resources, people to take care of the first steps.
Correct.
Like either you're training, undergraduates or graduate students, or you're training lay workers, and you're taking that forward after the first layer of the work has been done. You're
Correct.
moving them up to a professional.
Correct.
So as a result, your need for professionals is less.
Is lesser, and the pressure on them is less. Also, we do struggle with number of mental health professionals in the country.
Yes, and this model can also apply to rural areas.
India has sort of woken up to mental health awareness only in the last decade or lesser, and hence as a result we've not really had mental health infrastructure and the requisite number of professionals to gear up for how massive the mental health crisis is.
And a major reason for that still remains the stigma that surrounds the subject. As someone who's worked extensively in terms of creating mental health awareness, counseling, as well as destigmatization, do you see a change in terms of us breaking that taboo around the subject?
So I think that's a really good question, Medha. A lot of times, I've noticed that, in workshops, when you're trying to understand psychology and mental health, it's only like recently that they started making stigma an entire workshop in itself, because stigma is such an important piece. And I started thinking about stigma when I was at Teachers College. And for me, I think platforms which are anonymous, which allow you to chat on text, and which are, not necessarily requiring you to share the way you sound or the way you look with them, create this great space for sharing, because they provide you anonymity in the best sense of the word. And they, I think, have really resulted in a lot more people reaching out for help.
Correct.
Because it kind of takes care of that stigma piece, or at least on the surface level begins to work through that, because once the person reaches out, then the real work begins, right? As a result, a lot more people are reaching out to professionals, and as a result, there are a lot more professionals today in India, trained in mental health work. As a whole, people like on social media, influencers and celebrities, and of course with Deepika Padukone's whole campaign of Live Love Love, all these things have added so much to people understanding and becoming so much more aware of the importance of mental health.
Absolutely.
And it's not just that concept anymore that it's just in your head. It's fascinating to see the change already. And I think we've just begun.
I could not agree more. I think there's been a paradigm shift there in conversation, at least in the last 2 or 3 years for sure.
And it's so essential for people in the public space to use their platforms responsibly and come out with their stories, which sort of helps destigmatize things like mental health also validates what a lot of people might be feeling, and that's the validation that most of us are seeking, especially when we are down and out.
What, as per you, would be the top tips you'd want to give to someone who's wanting to enter this space?
One thing that I actually end up always asking students to do is like a visualization. This is really important. Okay. So think about, like 5 years later and then 10 years later, which is the common, recipe. Everyone says 5 and 10 years. Think about, these time points and think about your life. Imagine your life. So this is something I actually got from my first boss. And she often told me that think about a day that you wake up. Okay. 5 years later. Think about where you are, which country are you in, where are you, waking up. Maybe think about even personal things like, how you visualize your life, who are you waking up with, or are you waking up alone, whatever. And then think about where you see yourself going after getting ready. Is it a hospital? Is it a university? Is it a clinic? Is it an organization, a corporate organization? Where are you going to work? What does it look like? What are the kind of people you're working with? Think about and visualize all of these things, because that will really help you to understand what do you want to do right now to get there.
While you were speaking, I was actually visualizing my plus 5 years and plus 10 years. That's such a great way of looking at it, because you can work backwards then.
Yeah, absolutely. Right.
Can you tell us a little bit more, Shivangi, about what your PhD focus is and what is the end game for Shivangi?
Right now, what I'm doing is like a mix between clinical psychology, developmental psychology, and a sense of cognitive psychology. And I think that my thesis is focusing on looking at infants who are at risk versus those who are not at risk, understanding intersensory perceptions in them, actually how their interaction takes place with their mothers as well. So it's actually really helpful in terms of clinical outcomes as well, because it tells you what can be done in terms of enhancing outcomes towards development and growth, like cognitive and social skill development. For individuals who are at risk, especially, and also individuals who are not at risk, this kind of work will help parents also understand how they can, integrate their interaction with the baby.
That's fantastic.
It's so important to understand that that's such a critical period.
Yeah.
It's actually interesting that we actually never talk about the mental health impact of the work mental health professionals themselves do in this country, and it takes a heavy toll on them, because that's what you're privy to day in and day out, which is a heavy load emotionally and psychologically for anyone. How do you cope with that as a mental health professional?
So I think, Medha, honestly, the reason why I wanted to start taking cases and working around mental health as a professional really was because I was myself seeking therapy so regularly. Out of everything else that I do, like for instance, career support work or research work, you would think that all of that takes a lot more toll on me. But actually, being a mental health support system for someone actually takes the most toll on an individual, because it just requires your entire complete attention, right? And it requires you to be fully there, right?
Correct.
And that 1 hour also can be so exhausting,
Exactly.
And it's so important to be so present, because you have to navigate the individual in the right directions and provide the right kind of information and support.
Correct.
So it's such a crucial 1 hour for a person, hats off to all the, mental health professionals in the country. My stress buster really, of course, I have my coping mechanisms, which I won't share, but I'm working on them. So that's a good thing. But at the same time, the best coping for me has been continuing the process of my own personal therapy, and in addition to that, of course, having a support system is really important, Medha. Like, having that group of friends, or having that one person that, maybe you met at
You
work,
share with.
a good friend, or a family member, anyone.
And hopefully this conversation might even help a few other people listening in to realize looking after your mental health is an ongoing process. It is not just applicable to someone who's gone through it in the past, but it's an ongoing effort that we have to do the way we look after our physical health. It's pretty much the same way. Shivangi, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you. On behalf of me and the entire team of Mentorsphere, I thoroughly thank you for your time. I'm taking back so much from this conversation, and I know there are going to be a bunch of student working professionals who are interested in the space, but honestly also a lot of people who are struggling with nuances of mental health who would really benefit from this conversation.
Absolutely.
True.
Talking to you, hearing from you also, it's been honestly such an engaging and dynamic conversation. I'm so glad.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of Career Podcasts with Mentorsphere. If you're someone who's looking to build a career in the psychology space, book your session with Shivangi on our platform today. And we'll catch you on the next episode.